Wait, what the heck is this?
We don't have to read all of this, do we?
Wait, I have to read all of this? Mr. Dungeon Master, sir, you never said reading was gonna be part of the game.
Indeed, our dim-witted barbarian friend notwithstanding, this is a lot of house rules for us to have to read, understand, and then use.
Now look, you guys, I'm the Dungeon Master, and the DMG is quite clear about this. The Dungeon Master is the master of the rules. I can create as much homebrew stuff and house rules as I want.
Granted, but this is borderline unreadable.
Yeah, and I like the core rules just fine. Why can't we just keep them as is?
Yeah, I agree. This will also make it a big pain every time we have to onboard a new player to these skits.
I'm never gonna be able to read all of this. Why would you do this to me?
I feel like the DM isn't making this game accessible enough for all of the players, and Fat Cat feels very strongly about this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess we can't use these house rules then, can we?
Well, wait a second there. Maybe the DM will take another pass at them so our barbarian can more easily understand them.
Something more easy for the barbarian to understand than this?
Yes, I think the DM should do an interpretive dance for all of his homebrew rules.
That would probably help a lot. I would love an interpretive dance for all of these rules.
Heck yeah, make the DM dance!
Fine! I will do an interpretive dance for every house rule in the binder on this Friday's live stream.
Yay! This is gonna be awesome!
Welcome to DM Lair. I'm Luke Hart, and I've been a Dungeon Master since high school. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today in the Lair, we're going to be talking about 9 general guidelines for making homebrew and house rules in your D&D or RPG games. And this is a topic kind of close to my heart because whenever I see homebrew content, either on D&D Beyond or D&D Wiki or wherever, it's almost always completely broken and overpowered. And there are some house rules I hear about free feats to everyone at level 1, for instance, that I feel can introduce a cascade of issues the DM would then have to deal with. And after I go over these guidelines for making homebrew, I'll explain my approach to homebrew content in D&D and house rules and my general thoughts about it. Also, as a reminder, my Kickstarter, Into the Fae, closes tomorrow, so just a couple days left to get your pledge in for this level 1 to 5 adventure module featuring new Fae creatures, magic items, and even spells. Speaking of homebrew, all of the adventures in the module were designed by yours truly. In fact, everything in the book was pretty much made by me, and I'm working with lots of professionals in the industry to ensure this is a high quality product. Of course, there'll be lots of awesome art and fly merch as well, dice bags, t-shirts, and even tactical tokens. There's a link to the Kickstarter down below. And now, on to the homebrew guidelines. Number 1, the value added by the new rules should outweigh the burden of additional complexity. Okay, what do I mean by this? Let's use an extreme example to make a point, because that's kind of what I do around here. Let's say that Jim Bob, the DM, decides to homebrew the crap out of the D&D 5th edition rule set. He adds about 60 pages of additional rules to the player handbook and creates binders of the new rules for each of his players. Then, the players are expected to read and follow the new rules. And wouldn't you know it, the players all kind of groan at this. Especially considering that Jim Bob isn't a game designer nor a writer, meaning that reading and understanding the new rules is a real slog. And after doing all this and getting into the game, the players who have all played unmodified 5e before all pretty much feel that although Jim Bob's rules certainly changed the game a lot, they didn't actually make the game any better for them. They just changed lots of things according to Jim Bob's personal tastes, making things different. So, from the player's point of view, there was very little value added by all of these new homebrew rules, but lots of additional complexity that they do now have to slog through, and that sucks. If you're going to make homebrew rules or house rules, make sure that the value a rule adds to the game is worth the cost of additional complexity. And in all honesty, that value should be at least double or triple the complexity cost. Number 2, don't reinvent the wheel. The key to homebrew is to supplement the game. add things in that you feel are missing and would be cool to have. But the moment you turn into Jim Bob and are writing additional rules that players have to slog through, I'm not really sure that's homebrew anymore. That's you writing a new game system. And if your players signed up to play D&D or Pathfinder or Call of Cthulhu or whatever, you shouldn't be surprised if they peace out when you give them an entirely new game system that more than likely doesn't work too well because you're not a game designer. I get that dungeon masters tend to be extremely creative people and we love making new things, but we also need to realize the extent of our abilities and what our limitations are. Most of us can create some homebrew here and there that will make the game a more enjoyable experience, but I don't think many of us are qualified to be game designers because there's a big difference between playing games and designing games. Number 3, get player buy-in. Recently, I kicked off a Curse of Strahd campaign, which, to tangent just a little bit, you can watch live on my Twitch channel or as VODs on my DM Lair Streams YouTube channel, links below. I also have live streams Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Twitch if you want to swing by, ask me any D&D questions you may have, paint miniatures together, or even make me dance and sing. Both of which I'm extremely good at, by the way. Anyway, Curse of Strahd campaign, yeah. I homebrewed an insanity system that I wanted to use with the campaign, but I didn't just force it on my players. I presented the idea and the basic rules I had for it to my players, explaining that I would like to use it, but that I wanted it to be a collaborative effort whereby all of us were tweaking the insanity rule set together. My thought here is that when players are part of the process, they take on the mindset of owners and become invested in the success of the rules, instead of just hoping that the DM will give up on some horrible rules that they've been forcing down their throats. And second of all, because there are more minds at work fleshing out the details of the insanity rule set, there's a far better likelihood that the rules will be halfway decent and accomplish the purpose for which they were designed. So there was the initial pitch to my players, and now as we're playing the game, we are collectively tweaking the insanity rules to make sure they work well for our game. By the way, I do eventually plan on making my insanity rules available for everyone to use and put them here as a free download or over on DriveThruRPG, where, by the way, you can find lots of other free D&D supplements and even adventures, link below. Number 4, stop using homebrew rules your players don't like. This is super important. I cannot emphasize that enough. No matter how much time and effort and loving care you put into some homebrew rules, if your players collectively just don't like them, you should probably stop using them. I know, it's like cutting off a leg. It's hard, but your players' considerations are important. Now, I'm not saying changing the core rules, because players will sometimes rebel against those as well, but homebrew is not the core rules, and if your players aren't having fun with it, that should give you pause to consider. For instance, some time ago, I made a video about my new homebrew initiative system that I began using with some of my groups. And one of my groups, the Sword Coast Guard, who later became my Curse of Strahd group, didn't like them a whole lot. At least they didn't think it was notably better than the standard 5e initiative system. So the group voted and we all decided to go back to rules as written for initiative. Now, of course, I don't always advocate for voting on things in D&D because the Dungeon Master is the one running the game and adjudicating the rules, not the players. But in the case of homebrew rules like this, it made sense to me. Also, really important point here, be willing to stop using homebrew rules if your players don't like them. I made that point before, I make it again. Okay, we emphasize that point. Number 5, homebrew should add something new to the game. This seems like a pretty obvious point, so I'll try to make it short here. The basic idea is that if you can, for instance, use an existing race and class to come very close to a character concept you have, there is no need to homebrew an entire new class. I feel like sometimes folks get a little too homebrew happy and want to make new stuff when they really don't need to. Number 6, make homebrew balanced. This, my friends, my wonderful, beautiful homebrew fanatics, is my principal complaint about almost all homebrew I see out there. There is a 99.9% chance that any homebrew item I see, be it a class, a feat, a spell, whatever, is completely and totally broken and super overpowered. Let's take a moment to pick on the Band-Aid spell that you can find on D&D Beyond. With this cantrip, you can heal 1d4 plus 1 damage. So, ladies and gentlemen, that means you can pretty much heal up 100% between every single encounter you have. And since the premise of adventure design in 5th edition is based on resource management by players and resource depletion by the DM and the adventure, this cantrip pretty much destroys the game. All game balance is just gone. This is a previous point about not all dungeon masters being game designers, right? Am I exaggerating a little bit? Sure, maybe. But this is a classic example of a completely broken homebrew item.
All right, genius, then how do you balance homebrew?
Yeah, if you're so smart, then tell us how.
Now, I'm not a game designer for 5th edition, so if they have some behind the scenes guidelines for how they design and balance different game features, I'm not privy to them. So all I can really do is compare something I'm homebrewing to similar things in officially published rulebooks. And what I'm doing here with this comparison is making sure that what I'm homebrewing is more or less at the same power level as the existing thing. If it's a class, it shouldn't be markedly more powerful than other classes such as the Paladin. If it's a spell, it should have a level of power comparable to other spells of the same level, that sort of thing. For instance, if the dude who homebrewed Band-Aid had taken 2 minutes or 2 seconds to look at other existing spells in the game, he might have noticed that there are 0 healing spells as cantrips, and Band-Aid might just be a tad bit overpowered. Number 7, tag homebrew as alpha versions and tweak as you play. This happens to me all the time. I create a homebrew rule or item that I think is balanced, but gameplay reveals that it is not. Sometimes it's too powerful, sometimes not powerful enough. So what I do with homebrew stuff is I tell my players that it is an alpha version and that we will be tweaking it as we use it. And if it's a magic item I create, I even type this at the bottom of the handout I give my players. And then, periodically throughout the game, we all take a moment to talk about the homebrew item, discussing any changes if they're needed. And if they are, we make them. Telling your players in advance that there will be changes based on gameplay is super important because it sets expectations. And then when the changes happen, as they almost certainly will, it helps players feel like their super cool thing is not getting a nerf because they were expecting it to be tweaked.
Yeah, because nerfs really suck.
Number 8, don't use homebrew you find online. Yeah, sorry, lots of folks are probably not going to like this, but since most of it is broken and OP, why even bother? Instead, if a player has a special concept for a class they'd like to play, I suggest that the Dungeon Master and player work together to flesh that out. It's going to be a lot more personalized for the player, and they can better ensure, hopefully, that it's more balanced for the DM's campaign. And if Dungeon Masters have a cool idea for homebrew stuff, then they should flesh it out themselves, working to ensure it fits in the theme of their campaign and isn't crazy OP. Number 9, homebrew monsters get a pass.
Here we go again. Luke contradicting everything he's already said.
But, well, no, not exactly. You don't want to give them a total pass. You still want to make sure homebrew monsters are balanced. But I encourage Dungeon Masters to go hog wild, making their own custom and cool monsters. You're not gonna run them by your players first, obviously, and it's kind of hard to playtest them since the first time the PCs encounter them is the playtest. But the fact is that encountering new monsters or old monsters with cool special new abilities is super awesome and makes the game experience a ton better in my opinion. And besides creating custom game worlds, it gives Dungeon Masters an outlet for all of their creative energy. I tend to create a fair amount of homebrew monsters myself, but they're often just a base creature that I've tweaked a little bit to make it more interesting, and usually more deadly. Perhaps in the future I'll do an entire video going over my approach to homebrewing monsters, including how to balance them. We'll see. Luke's approach to homebrew. My general approach to homebrew stuff is pretty simple, and I share this not because I think it's the right way to do things, nor that everyone should follow it. Just the thoughts and opinions of one man, so take that into consideration. First, I avoid homebrew stuff, except monsters, as much as possible. I do not want to burden my players with tons of additional rules I've created. If I homebrew rules, they are to address a specific need I see or to reinforce the theme of a campaign, such as possibly going insane or receiving lingering injuries when you drop to 0 hit points. As far as homebrew races, classes, spells, and other player options, I completely avoid them. In my opinion, there is a plethora of these options already available in the official published rules, and there is no need to homebrew them. My stand on this also has to do with how little time I have to dedicate to homebrewing these sorts of things and making sure they're balanced. So in my games, there's really no homebrewing of stuff on the part of the players. I tell them they can use anything from the official rules, but no third-party, playtest, or homebrew stuff. This makes my life a whole lot easier and helps ensure that overpowered, broken stuff doesn't upset the game experience for both me and the players. Now, this approach is probably not for everyone, and in fact, most people probably don't want to follow this approach as strictly as I do. It's a pretty hard line, and it does stamp down on folks' creativity. I do it out of necessity because I just don't have time. However, I feel that homebrewing cool things, as long as they're balanced, certainly has the potential to improve the game experience for everyone at the table. I just contradicted like everything I've said. That's pretty normal around here. Don't forget to follow me over on Twitch for some chill live streams where we hang out, talk D&D, and even paint minis together. Let me know your approach to homebrewing. Next week, we'll discuss general approaches to dealing with powerful spells that upset the game. But until then, click right here to learn 7 house rules to improve your D&D game. And until next time, let's play D&D.